Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
This episode is brought to you by Mint Mobile. Get that spring cleaning feeling by finally throwing out your old wireless plan and getting onto Mint Mobile for just $15 a month. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month unlimited wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/dark. That's mintmobile.com/dark. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/dark. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower, above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details.
The following program is a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcast Network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com to learn more about this and our other weekly storytelling programs. Thank you for listening, and enjoy the show.
Good evening. I'm storyteller Otis Jiry, and I ain't your grandfather. From where I'm from, we don't do bedtime stories. And if that's what you were expecting, you're in the wrong place. If it's terrifying tales you're after, well then, I've got just the thing. Get comfortable, settle in, turn off the lights, if you dare. Your night is about to get a whole lot darker. Who needs sleep anyway?
Good evening! You're listening to Scary Stories Told in the Dark. Welcome, dear listeners, to Season 15, Episode 7. I'm your host, Otis Jiry, and in this episode, I'll be performing 4 tales to terrify you, courtesy of authors Brian Martinez, Kyle Harrison, Dale Thompson, and Seth Paul. Tonight, we'll hear stories of witchy warnings, irrational investigations, monstrous matrons, and killer cleanups. You're listening to the standard edition of tonight's program, which contains the first 2 spine-tingling stories. If you'd like to show your support and enjoy an extended version of this and other episodes with twice the terror, visit simplyscarypodcast.com and click Patrons in the upper menu to sign up today. Thank you for your support. Now, it's time to take a walk together down the moonlit trail, so lock your doors, turn your lights down low, and settle in. Now the show is about to begin. Call it a swamp, call it a bog, call it wetlands, but most call it a place you don't want to go because you can trust it about as far as you can see under the water. Between gators, snakes, insects, skunk apes, and the occasional supernatural horror, tonight we'll be treading deep into the muddy, sticky depths of marsh country, and I suggest you bring a shovel. Brian Martinez starts us off this evening with the sordid tale of 2 ne'er-do-wells who think they've scored the jackpot, off to the far reaches of the swamp in search of treasure. Well, they're going to find something, all right. Without further ado, I present to you Rooted in Time Cypress trees sped past on both sides of the truck. Its old tires bounced over the dirt road as a symphony of rattling beer bottles sang from the back seat. Silas looked over at Bo. His friend, older than him by a few years, was drinking a warmed-over beer as he steered his beloved rust box between the trees. Bo didn't take his eyes from the winding road, not for a second, but he noticed Silas's expression all the same. "I don't want to hear any second thoughts from you," he said, draining the last of the beer and tossing it in the back. "What if she's home?" "Home?" Bo scoffed. "Nobody's seen her in months. She's likely already croaked." Bo turned to look at him, his graying beard forming a devilish grin. "Have you ever seen a dead body?" Silas looked away. He didn't like to think about that. "I'm just saying, there are other ways of making dough," he said. "You know Jacob Landry works out in Slidell. He says he knows where they keep the keys to the lot. Says we could clear out every damn car in the place in one night and be gone before they knew what hit them." "You want to rot in his cell? You keep listening to what Jacob Landry has to say," Bo proclaimed. "Stick with me. You'll wind up somewhere a hell of a lot more comfortable." "Yeah," Silas grumbled under his breath. "A pine box." Silas had heard the rumors about old Ma'am Delphine. The ancient woman was said to be a root worker, a practitioner of hoodoo and swamp magic, who lived in the area for untold decades. Folks went out of their way to avoid her rundown shack out there in the middle of the swamp. And here they were, heading right for it like two mosquitoes to an electrical lamp. The problem was, Bo had heard another rumor making the rounds, that Ma'am Delphine was hoarding something worth more money than either of them had seen in their lifetimes, something like a pirate's treasure. Stories of pirates were nothing new in the Honey Island swamp. The infamous Pierre M.O. himself had been known to kick around the area, stashing his stolen gold wherever he could, and most of it was still yet to be found. Recently, though, whispers had been going around that Delphine was sitting on a cache she'd dug up somewhere near the shack, where treasure hunters never dared venture. Only God knew how she'd found it, whether by patient hunting or more supernatural means, but now that she had, all she'd done was stash it under the floorboards and sit on it. The old woman hadn't been seen coming or going from her shack in months. Most folks figured she'd finally kicked the bucket, but a few of them thought it only proved the theory. For the first time in her long and lonesome life, Ma'am Delphine had something worth taking. And once Bo had made up his mind to take it, it was only a matter of time before he dragged Silas along for the ride. With the sun finally dipping below the cypress, Bo parked his truck just off the road, behind a tangle of bushes large enough to hide it. They jumped out in their waders and boots, checking that they couldn't be seen from the road. Before they left the truck behind, Bo ducked into the back and reemerged with something made of gray metal, which he quickly tucked into his waistband before shutting the door. He'd only taken a few steps when Silas grabbed him by the shoulder and stopped him where he stood. "You said no guns." Bo swiped his hand away, annoyed. "I say you didn't need to bring one. I didn't say nothing about me." "I'm not going to jail, Bo, not for this, not for you," Bo chuckled. "You ain't doing this for me. You want out of this sewer of a town even more than I do. That's why I asked you along. That, and you know your way around this swamp better than anyone." Bo shoved his finger into Silas' chest, poking him to enunciate each word. "You're the bloodhound. I'm the hunter. You do your job, I'll do mine. What do you say?" Silas swallowed, trickling sweat down his back. He had half a mind to break Bo's nose, take the keys to the truck, and leave him stranded on the side of the dirt road. But he also knew that if Bo, who had half a foot on him, and at least 60 pounds, if he didn't knock the guy out in one hit, he would lose the fight, and he didn't trust Bo to stop punching when the other guy went down. Bo suddenly belted out a laugh so loud it made Silas flinch. "You need to relax, kid. I'm joking. The gun's only for the gators. He slapped Silas playfully on the cheek before walking toward the water. "You coming or not?" Silas fought with himself a bit, but he followed. The noise of the swamp grew louder as they walked closer, a chaotic mixture of buzzing and croaking and hooting. Silas entered first, climbing through the tangled reddish roots of mangroves along the shore before stepping down into the murky water. The waders and boots kept his legs and feet dry, but he could still feel the cold and the muck in every step. Bo joined him, and together they moved south, the cacophony of frogs and insects echoing off the trees. It was so loud that Silas felt dizzy. The stink of mud, the damp taste of decay in the back of his throat. It had been years since he'd set foot in the swamp, and his tolerance for it had worn off, an old addict returning to the habit. "You know which way you're going?" Bo asked, trailing a few feet behind. Silas nodded wordlessly, then craned his neck to see the cypress trees towering over them. They were giants, the moss hanging from their branches, swaying gently in the breeze like wedding veils. The pair pushed through sharp-edged blades of sawgrass that rose from the shallow waters. The grass provided too much cover for Silas's tastes, too many places to hide. Occasional splashes caused him to jump as he scanned the swamp's surface for telltale signs of predators on the hunt. After a few minutes, the incessant buzzing of insects was broken by Bo's voice. "Hey, you ever see her?" "Who?" Silas asked, slapping at an itch on his neck. He came back with a mangled mosquito mixed in with his own blood. "Delphine, a wicked witch herself." Silas threw an annoyed look over his shoulder. "Shut up with that. She's no witch. Hell, my granddaddy told me stories about her. How old do you reckon she is by now?" Silas shook his head. "Don't know, don't care. Anyway, I thought you said she'd be dead. Well, if she wasn't before, she will be now." Silas said nothing. "I ain't saying I'll do the job myself, just that her heart will give out when she sees us, if it hasn't already." The old trees, their knobby knees jutting up from the water's surface, groaned and creaked as they swayed in the breeze. An owl hooted in the distance, a sound that hung on the air like an unanswered question. Soon night fell, and the sunlight died. The pair took out their flashlights and continued through the stinking swamp, Silas navigating them toward where the old woman's shack was supposed to be. With each step through the knee-high water, Silas resisted the urge to turn back. Every frog croak and animal cry sounded like a warning. He knew Bo had to be feeling the same thing deep down. Any sane person would. But Bo wasn't the type to show it. He was either the bravest man Silas had ever met, or the dumbest, and most days he couldn't tell the two apart. His mind drifted back to when he was young, angling for catfish with his father in their aluminum boat. How he would watch the sunlight filtering through the swamp's canopy, the boat leaving ripples in its wake. How his father pointed out hidden gator nests nestled among the reeds. How he identified the calls of birds echoing through the trees. Then, how everything changed after his mother's funeral. How they argued and fought. Something moved past him in the water. Silas was pulled from the memory by the feeling of water rushing through his legs. "Do you feel that?" he asked, thrown off balance. Whatever was down there was big enough to make him lose his footing. "Feel what?" "Something in the water." Silas shone his flashlight into the murky water, but it did nothing to illuminate whatever hid below. Bo shone his light around as well, trying to catch sights of ripples in the water, but other than themselves moving it around, the water was deathly still. "You sure?" Bo asked. Silas wanted to shout that yes, he was sure, but the truth was he couldn't say for certain. There were good reasons he didn't come out to the swamp anymore, one of which being he couldn't trust himself to keep his wits about him. "Just be careful," Silas conceded. "Keep a lookout for movement." Bo scoffed. "Like I ever stopped." Silas took a deep breath of heavy air, trying to calm his nerves. He wasn't sure about what he'd felt in the water, what it could be. if it was anything at all, but he knew standing around waiting for it to come back wasn't a good idea. Just as he was about to move again, however, he spotted it in the distance. The overgrowth of twisting vines and brush was so dense, one could almost miss the shack at first glance. It was an ancient thing, barely standing, like an old growth long since dead and dried up. A platform of rotted wood barely kept the shack above water, with a collapsing dock leading up to the door. Silas felt a pang of guilt for bringing Bo and his gun right to the old woman. He considered leading him in a different direction, pretending he couldn't find it. But before he could say anything, Bo whistled in that way he did when he was excited. "Easy pickings," Bo said, slapping Silas on the back, and trudged past him through the water. They approached the shack slowly, listening under the din of insects for signs of life. When they were sure they'd heard none, they pulled themselves up onto the deck and stalked quietly to the shack. Bo tried to get a look inside, but the moonlight barely penetrated the grime-coated windows. "Seems like no one's home," Bo said, flashing a woolly grin. He tried the door, but found it locked. Then he surprised Silas by taking a step back and kicking it in, the rotted wood exploding inward in a cloud of splinters and dead termites. A wave of stale air thick with mildew and unidentifiable smells assaulted their noses. Silas thought of those Egyptian tombs being opened on television, the ones full of mold and ancient curses. "Bo," Silas said, "I'm not sure I can—" "Listen to me," Bo cut him off. "You want to be stuck in this town forever?" His face was knotted with rage, a look Silas had never seen on his friend, like a starved animal guarding its kill. He couldn't remember what good he'd ever seen in Bo, or if he'd just seen what he wanted to see. Looking between Bo and the open threshold behind him, Silas shook his head. "Nah, I guess I don't," he admitted. Bo's angry face turned to a sickly smile. "Then let's go in there and get what's ours." As they stepped inside, shining their flashlights ahead of them, the thick stench of decay became more intense. It was a stink worse than death. The shack seemed abandoned, with sunken furniture and debris littering the single room. Vines had slowly crept in through a broken window and spread across the walls to reclaim space. The thickest of the vines and branches had entirely overtaken the furthest corner, forming a tangle so thick it hid whatever was underneath. "Well, this looks promising," Bo said eagerly. He took a few steps forward, turning his flashlight on the tangled mass. Silas tried to stop him, but he'd seen it too late. A gnarled hand, pale and veined like a spider web, was frozen stiff at the center of the vines. Bo shrieked, scrambling back and nearly knocking Silas backward through the open door. Silas shone his flashlight on it to get a better look at the stiffened claw aimed at them. An old woman was half merged into the wicker-like growth, her body grotesquely transformed over the decades. She appeared to have been dead a long time, long enough for nature to reclaim not just her shack, but her body as well. Greenbrier vines had grown into her skin, their thorny stems wrapped around her stomach and chest. Heart-shaped leaves trailed down her ears and nostrils and disappeared inside. Having regained himself, Bo shook the dust off. "I told you," she croaked. He joked with a nervous laugh. Delphine's gaze shifted suddenly, fixing them with milk-white eyes. "Sweet Jesus," Silas whispered. Bo said nothing, his throat too dry to form the words. And then, to both men's horror, they watched as her mummified lips split open to speak. "What are their names?" she asked, her dry, raspy voice sending a chill through them. Bo and Silas glanced at each other, silent. Then Bo, trying to hide the panic in her voice, said, "Just two strangers come to check on you." "This one lies," she whispered in reply. She stirred, aggravated. Silas quickly stepped forward. "And to be honest, ma'am, we heard rumors, stories about something you're keeping secret, something valuable." Bo shoved him, trying to shut him up, but a strange smile spread across Delphine's ancient face etched with wrinkles and dried stems. "This one speaks the truth," Delphine croaked. "They seek it, seek what I guard." Beau's eyes grew in his skull, excited that the rumors were true, that she really had found something out there in the muck. "My apologies for the lie," he said, trying to sound polite, and yet he had one hand rested on the gun tucked in his belt. "I wasn't sure how agreeable you'd be. Some folks get spooked by a face like mine." He paused, taking in the sight of her. "Would you be willing to share your find with us? We could sell it for you and split the money, of course. Any way you say is fair." Silas knew Beau better than that. If he walked away with his prize, Ma'am Delphine would never see him again. Even if she did, he'd make sure she was committed, locked up for being delusional. Silas was about to tell Beau they needed to leave, maybe even knock him out and drag him away if need be. "It's beyond value," she replied simply. Beau looked back at Silas. Silas shook his head, warning his friend not to continue. A tight smile flashed across Beau's face as he pulled the gun from his waistband and showed it to the woman. "If you don't mind, I'd like to check on that myself." The moment the words left Beau's lips, the shack shuddered around him, and an impossibly low sound came from beneath the floorboards, like the shifting of ancient bedrock, and the air became thick and heavy. Ma'am Delphine cackled, a sound like dry leaves scraping earth. The wicker shapes shifted and contorted around her. "They think I guard it from them, and not the other way around." With a sickening crack, a maw opened in the rotten floorboards beneath Beau. He screamed as he plunged into the darkness below, limbs flailing, unable to fire off a single shot. Like that, he was gone. Silas lunged to the side, narrowly avoiding the gaping hole as splintered wood exploded. He landed hard, the impact knocking the wind out of him. As he scrambled on his knees back to the exit, towards safety and the moonlight, the unearthly sound grew louder in his ears until it was all he could hear, the pressure threatening to rupture his eardrums. Behind him, an obsidian mass emerged from beneath the trembling shack, rising from the hole in the floor and rapidly expanding outward. Countless fractal patterns writhed across its oily surface in impossible shades of purple and black. Ma'am Delphine stared in reverence as it moved and pulled and shifted in all directions, most of all toward Silas. Just as he reached the doorway, it made contact with his leg. His nerves came alive with eons of pain and destruction, a sensation like nothing he could have ever imagined. He felt his mind turn in on itself and expand outward, tearing apart piece by piece and moment by moment. And then, quick as it had started, the feeling was gone, replaced by the purest darkness he'd ever known. Silas blinked the wetness from his eyes. He was standing beneath the cypress trees, forgetting how he'd gotten there. The sounds of the swamp closed in around him, the distant croaks of frogs, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was a beautiful day in Honey Island Swamp, a good one for fishing, if it only hadn't been ruined. The arguments with his father were growing angrier, more violent, and this one had been the worst of them all. He'd left his father behind in the boat and climbed onto solid ground, going for a walk to clear his head. He tried to shake off the bitterness, but it clung to him like humidity. He walked on, trudging through the muddy soil, with his heart heavy in his chest. As he wandered deeper into the shadows, Silas tried to push away the anger and focus instead on the odd beauty of the swamp around him. But then a scream pierced the air like a knife, and Silas froze. He knew for certain which way it had come from. It was the way he'd come, the direction of the boat, from his father. Silas broke into a run, feet pounding wet earth as he raced back toward the boat. He burst through the undergrowth and stumbled into the clearing where the boat lay moored. But what he saw there brought him to a staggering halt. His father lay sprawled on the ground next to the water, his face in agony, as he clutched at the stump where his arm had been. Blood pooled beneath him, staining the earth red. Silas's stomach flipped as he rushed forward and dropped to his knees by his father's side. "Dad," he cried, his voice breaking. "What happened?" His father could only groan in response, his eyes wide with pain. Silas' hands trembled as he laid them on his father's remaining hand, the warmth of his blood soaking into his skin. And then he heard it, the unmistakable thrash of a gator moving through the water. Fear gripped him as he looked up, his eyes scanning for any sign of the creature. But it was already too late. The gator lunged out of the water with impossible speed, its jaws snapping shut around Silas' father with a sickening crunch. Silas screamed in terror as his father's hand was pulled out of his. The man was dragged away from him and into the water, the last flash of his face a mask of terror. Just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The gator disappeared beneath the surface, leaving ripples in its wake. Silas found himself alone in the clearing, his father's blood staining his hands as he struggled to make sense of what had just happened. As he knelt there, lost in disbelief, the sounds of the swamp grew quiet as if muted, drained of their power, and so too did the color of the sky, the movement of the trees, until all was dark and dead. Silas watched the last of his memories drain away, devoured by the black cloud Delphine watched over. What stayed behind was a cold hollow in his heart, the feeling of pain taken away, leaving only a shell, a container. It was a feeling he'd never asked for, if only because he didn't know he could. It is eaten. It sleeps now, the ancient crone said from the corner, her voice softer. Seated at the edge of the massive hole on the floorboards, the obsidian mass undulating before him, Silas felt a sensation in his hands like fire ants. He looked down lazily to find his hands growing thick purple veins that joined with the vines and roots webbed across the floor. He tried vaguely to move, to lift his hands, but was rooted to the spot. His thoughts, his fears, all those rambling noises began to fade, until only a single thought remained, simple and pure. "He joins her," Silas said. "He watches." The obsidian mass contracted it back into itself, disappearing into the hole from where it came and healing the wood as it went. Only the song of the frogs remained, the insects trilling in the air, the cypress trees swaying in the breath of the night. The wicker shapes stilled, and with them, Silas and Delphine. They watched over it together and waited. This episode is brought to you by Mint Mobile. Are you a fan of spring cleaning? I know I enjoy the feeling of opening windows, breathing fresh air, and getting rid of the junk that accumulates over the winter. But why stop at just your home? Mint Mobile's going to help you spring clean your wireless bill as well by removing all the overhead junk and getting you exactly what you need. Good service, good speeds, and good pricing. At just $15 a month, I think you'll be asking yourself, how did I put up with it for so long? Mint Mobile wants you to get out of the high fees, and new customers can get on board with a 3-month unlimited wireless plan for just $15 a month. That'll get you unlimited talk and text, data coverage on the largest 5G network in the country, and best of all, keep your contacts, keep your phone, and even keep your number. There's everything to gain and nothing to lose, well, except those ever-increasing bills piling up on your desk. So why wait to get to cleaning when you can start refreshing your monthly bills with Mint Mobile? I say start today with Mint Mobile and start your spring with a lot of green staying in your pocket. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month unlimited wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/dark. That's mintmobile.com/dark. cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/dark. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speeds slower, above 40 gigabytes on the unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. I hope you enjoyed Rooted in Time by Brian Martinez, as performed by yours truly. If you enjoyed that tale and would love to read more from tonight's very talented featured author, you can help support him by visiting simplyscarypodcast.com/Brian-Martinez. That's simplyscarypodcast.com/BRIAN-MARTINEZ. Thanks again for your support of this program and tonight's featured author. Oh, how touching. Now everyone is all together in one little room there to spend an eternity together. It kind of reminds me a little of the doctor's office. But sometimes it's not going into the swamp that gets you. It's what comes out of it. We turn now to a tale by Kyle Harrison of a strange figure that comes out of its nest to feed, and those who seek its annihilation. Without further ado, I present to you, The Rat Woman is Coming. Lived in this town for almost 14 years. Ain't ever seen anything like it before. This was around mid-2013. My pa and I were watching news about a horrible tornado down south when our own power, went out. We aren't city folks, so waiting for the lights to kick back on wasn't an option. I was told to head to the basement and reset the generator. I grabbed a flashlight and ran down there like a fire was on my butt. Never been too fond of dark places, and that basement was already creepy enough. When I got to the bottom of the stairs, I heard this strange noise. Sounded like a dog that had been shot in the shins and was yelping. Waved the flashlight side to side, my heart skipping a beat, when I saw what was down there. Thing had to be at least 10 foot tall, maybe more. I say more because it was hunched over, unable to reach its full height in the cramped basement. It was lean and limber like a fox, but covered in ungainly fur and cancer spots. Its tail was bigger than my forearm, swatting at spiders as its massive, bulbous head turned toward me, and I saw the face of a woman staring back at me. I ran back up the steps, screaming Jesus' name and begging for his glory to take me then and there. Pa scolded me, and when I started babbling like an idiot, he grabbed his rifle and went to the basement. I begged him to call the sheriff, but that didn't stop him from bounding toward the creature and letting out a few rounds as he shouted toward me to get back. I heard the thing scream. My God, I'll never forget. Sounded like a woman shrieking and an animal attacking itself. And then it pulled Pa down the steps. His spine hit the wall with a crunch, and a random shot ricocheted off the sidebar straight across my left ear. Haven't been able to hear good since. With blood trickling down that side of my face, I held a flashlight and went down there to see what had become of Pa. The basement was as silent as a tomb. That thing was nowhere to be seen, and neither was Pa. But I did see this hole in the wall that looked like a monster chewed it up and dragged Pa to hell. I called the police. My Pa was never found. I went down that tunnel, but only found bits of blood here and there. Eventually, it just came to a dead end, no rhyme or reason for any of it. No sign of a creature either, of course. No proof to my story except a strange misshapen hole. I didn't know it then, but our town had some experience with this monster. It wasn't until 2 years passed and I got drunk as a skunk at Marty's bar that I found out the creature had a name. The Rat Woman. Poetic and simple. Unforgettable. Old man Dirk was also drinking that night, and he was rambling about a thing that would snatch children at night. We all had seen missing person posters for years. Never struck me as different than any other small town. But Dirk said the cause of the disappearances was always the same. That thing feeds off our little podunk town, and its hunger's growing year by year, Dirk said. I pretended not to pay attention, but the more he talked, I realized this monster had to have been the same one that took my pa. Everyone in town had already forgotten about that, but it wasn't possible for me to just move on. Not when I knew that thing was alive and hunting others. I asked Dirk what he knew, but the old man was rambling so badly that I couldn't make any sense of it. Instead, he promised to show me where the Rat Woman hunted, and like a damn fool, I listened and trusted him. My second encounter with this beast was almost my last. Dirk told me to meet him in a few days over at the dilapidated housing project. The entire area had been meant for Section 8, but now, thanks to budget cuts and poor planning, it was a cesspool for the impoverished or the homeless. Half the buildings were empty, run down, or boarded up. The others were where drug dealers and low-income families mingled, barely scraping by. It was a sorry sight to see, and it didn't smell too great either. Dirk told me the Rat Woman turned up here frequently because no one in town paid attention when these people went missing. They didn't have the money to get media attention, so they just had to pray to God their child might one day come back alive. I remember how badly Pa had been injured and knew that was just wishful thinking. The monster tore people to shreds. We made our way to one of the older structures, a former civic center that looked like it might collapse at a moment's notice. The atmosphere was damp. It had rained recently. She likes the smell of flesh and the fresh, wet air, Dirk said with a steely grin. We went in further toward a lobby where it looked like he'd set up a trap to capture the beast. You really think this'll do the trick? I asked, looking over the contraption. Dirk didn't answer. I turned to him, expecting a response, and instead felt a sharp object hit the back of my head. When I came to, I couldn't move my hands or feet. I soon realized that I'd been strapped down to the machine that Dirk built, and he was standing over me with a butcher knife. "What the hell, man?" I shouted. He laughed like a madman and placed the knife next to my wrist. "She likes her food fresh, Joey. This here trap took me months to build, and now, with the storm just past, I know she'll be out for the hunt. Perfect chance to finally kill the bitch," he told me as he slit my wrist so that blood trickled on the ground. "Now don't you worry your pretty little head none, boy. I'll make sure the beast don't kill you. Really, you're doing both of us a favor. We can both get revenge on this thing tonight," he snickered as he hurried off into the darkness. I called out to him, begging for him to come back and untie me. Instead, I only heard the faint sound of water dripping and a large metallic fan blowing to life, wafting the scent of my fear into the air as I watched my life flash before my eyes. If I was wrong about the creature, I knew I'd probably die there that night. Strange as it sounds, I prayed the trap worked, and it did so quickly, so I could get out of this mess and punch Dirk's good teeth out. Hours passed, and the room grew unusually quiet. I wasn't sure where Dirk was hiding, but I was beginning to think our little hunt had been in vain. The cut had finally healed, and the blood had pooled into a dog bowl at my feet and was coagulating. I felt like I was going to faint quite a few times as I sat there, my body throbbing in pain. After what felt like an eternity, I heard rustling of metal above. "Dirk, that you? Can we fucking go home now?" No response in the void. The sound grew closer, and I felt my heart beat faster. It was slinking across the room like a predator, wary of any signs of danger. It smelled rancid, and its fur looked like it was covered in swamp water from somewhere close by. perhaps a nest of some kind that it had skittered out of. It stood to its full height, probably a good 12 feet, the shaggy silhouette towering over me as I saw the beady, gleaming white eyes of the woman stare into mine, hungry, ready to feast. "Dirk, for fuck's sake, she's here! Hurry and spring this thing!" I cried out as the creature skulked around on my backside, testing and prodding the trap as if calculating how it worked. It was going to find a way to eat me alive. I was certain of it. I felt its long, needle-like claws scratching against the back of my neck. The rat woman climbed on the side of the trap, carefully testing the pressure points. Saliva dropped from her misshapen whiskers onto my skin. She was close enough that I could see her features in the dim light. Like something out of a B-movie, she looked like a lab experiment gone wrong. Bruises and welts covering her skin. Scars along her neck and shoulders, fur and hair mixed everywhere. Her tail trembling and stretching to balance her giant body as she crawled atop me, her sagging breasts wheezing in my face as I did my best not to projectile vomit. Suddenly, as she was preparing to widen her jaw and nibble at my chest, the trap sprung. The massive metallic spring slammed against her neck and pinned her against me, causing her teeth to rip into my chest, and then she shrieked and wailed. I felt the wind get knocked out of me, and I called out to Dirk again, desperate for him to come and make the killing blow. The creature flailed and dug her needle claws into my body as I screamed for help. Her screams were louder, though. As her shrills split the air again, I saw a few silhouettes approach the lobby door. Homeless men and a few children wearing little more than drab clothes and flip-flops entered the building, staring at the nightmare in awe. "Help! You have to help me!" I screamed. They looked at each other, then hurried to the sides of the trap, using their bare hands to lift up the metallic spring. As soon as she was free, the creature bounded to the pipes. Wiping blood from her paws, she shrieked again and ran off into the night. They pulled me from the trap, cutting the bonds, and gave me room to breathe. "I can't thank you enough," I gasped. "We didn't do it for you," a voice said from the doorway. I turned to see an older woman standing there with something in her left hand. It was a duffel bag, dripping blood. They dropped it at my feet, and I saw Dirk's head inside, messy and twisted from mutilation. You're protecting that thing." "But why?" I said, as I tried to gather my strength again. "We are her children, and so we obey the rat woman's call," the old woman responded. "Take your friend as a warning. Do not return here. Do not attempt to find her again, or the same will happen to you," they warned. I carefully picked up the duffel bag, looking at their sunken faces and eyes, and realizing they really did worship this creature like a divine being. I ran as fast as I could, chucking the duffel bag into the river as I left. It wasn't all bad, though. I have since been able to take solace in that. I learned two things that night, you see. One is that I could trust no one except myself to see this through, and two is that the rat woman was real and mortal. The wounds I saw proved it could be hurt. If it can bleed, it can die, I reasoned. That night I resolved to find out more, to follow the stories, and discover where its nest was located. That took a good 6 years to get done, with a few near hits, and quite a few more misses than I'm willing to admit. But I won. I ran the rat woman out of town. It was winter, 6 or 7 months ago now, I suppose. I'd learned that this is the time the cryptid would go into hibernation. The map I'd slowly created told me that its nest had to be in the western swamps. The area was particularly dangerous, filled with gators and snakes and other predators. Not to mention the waters were deep and the storms bad. If the rat woman was there and had survived for this long, it knew the area well. It had to tread carefully. Of course, mapping the swamp took time. I had to hire local druggies that would do the work and not ask questions. I didn't want to ask for their help, but it was better to find people who could be manipulated than anyone I cared about. These scumbags knew how to take orders, as long as I supplied them with cash for their own vices. I had a focus now of finding the rat woman and ending her once and for all. When I did search for actual hunters to assist me, I went to the dark web. People there would kill anything without blinking an eye, or so I thought. What I got were greenhorns chomping at the bit to prove they were real men. The fantasy of tagging and bagging a monster was too enticing for any of them to pass up, especially because I was willing to pay. We moved into the swamp right after a storm. It was like Dirk said, I knew our bodies would smell fresher in a wet forest, and that would lure the rat woman out of her lair. Half of us went by boat, circling the swamp and setting up traps. If she did manage to evade our party, one of the other traps would do the trick. For the first time since my paw had been taken, I felt confident in our chances. I shouldn't have been. As our team circled the swamp and slowly closed in on the inner swamp, I noticed that other wildlife had gone curiously silent, hiding or running. The rat woman was on the move, pushing them out of her way. We'd found a trail. It looked like she was hungry and making mistakes. But we soon found out our plan hadn't accounted for her intelligence. We were radioing the other team, telling them to meet us near a mossy, twisted pin oak tree, when we realized we could hear the chirp of the device somewhere above our heads. That was when we saw several of the young men from the south boat, all of them tangled up with each other in the branches, their legs broken, then knotted together like the fractured bones to form a strange, uneven circle of pain above us, a warning that we were on her turf, and that the plan we thought we'd sketched out was about to go to shit. Instead of listening to that red flag, I urged those men to press forward, told them we couldn't let their friends' deaths be in vain. On the spot, I came up with a new plan. If we couldn't track the rat woman within the swamp, we could smoke her out of it. So, using those corpses, we set the inner circle to blaze, pouring gasoline on the trees and using the traps as a way of connecting the different portions of the mossy, waterlogged trees together. I was a man possessed. I knew that burning the swamp was risky. It would push her straight into our line of fire. And these men would likely die too when that moment came. I knew that as we left the swamp and watched the inferno grow. But I didn't care about that. My focus was on the screams in the swamp. The fire was doing what I wanted it to. Midnight passed us by, and we heard reports that one of the traps to our east had been sprung. Finally, she came out of her nest. With guns fully loaded, we marched on to the area, fresh blood trailing toward a cliffside on the south. Amid the stones, I saw her gruesome face staring at us. She was concerned. The men aimed their weapons to fire and riddled her body with bullets. In the end, the beast was taken down in a matter of seconds, her shrill cries filling the night air as she slumped to the ground like the wounded demon she was. I approached her body, eager to let out the final shot straight through her grisly face. I stood there, looking down at her dejected, battered features, and almost felt sorry for the monster. In the moment of hesitation, I felt something gnaw at my shoe. I looked down, and I was shocked to see a smaller creature slinking from her underbody, its gnarled teeth nibbling at my boots. Soon another emerged, then another, then a whole swarm. Firing randomly, I shouted for the men to retreat as her young fled and shrieked onto the swamp. We doubled back to our camp, mortified by the sound of them skittering off into the night. She had a whole litter, at least a dozen pups, now free and searching for homes. And worst of all, I was out of money to continue the hunt. I tried to convince the dark web hunters we had to be sure they were all taken care of, but they only cared about the big score. Their job was done as far as they were concerned. There's not much else to say, I'm afraid. I returned to try and gather the corpse, take credit for the kill. But when I finally did get to those rocks, the only thing I saw was a trail of blood and scat covering the rocks. It seemed that the rat woman had slunk back into the swamp, letting the river carry her to some new territory. I haven't seen her or her young since then. I'd like to think that means this was a victory, but I saw those creatures that suckled her breasts. They had faces of men. So now I come to Marty's and I drink away the nightmare of the people in this world that keep monsters like that bred and alive. It's never enough to make the pain go away. It never was and never will be. I know now I was foolish to think killing a single beast was the solution. There were always other monsters, including the kind that walk on two legs and smile and wave. There's always another creature like her lurking, waiting for the storm to pass and to hunt again. She's always coming, always feeding. And we'll always be just like her in our own little maze, chasing the shadows and searching for our own way. I hope you enjoyed The Rat Woman is Coming by Kyle Harrison, as performed by yours truly. If you enjoyed that tale and would love to read more from tonight's very talented featured author, you can help support him by visiting simplyscarypodcast.com/Kyle-Harrison. That's simplyscarypodcast.com/KYLE-HARRISON. Thanks again for your support of this program and tonight's featured author, as well as all of our authors who shared their inner demons with us tonight. Now, before we go, I'd also like to take a moment to thank you personally for joining me on this episode of Scary Stories Told in the Dark. If you enjoyed what you've heard on today's program, please take a moment to stop by our iTunes page or wherever else you listen to your favorite podcasts and leave us a 5-star review and a kind word. It makes a huge difference, and it would mean a lot to us. If you'd like to hear a premium extended edition of tonight's and all of our other episodes featuring twice the terror, visit simplyscarypodcast.com today and click the Patrons link in the menu at the top of the screen. You'll find yourself at chillingtalesfordarknights.com, where you can purchase season passes for this podcast and our other quality storytelling programs, or become a patron for as little as $5 a month and get access to our entire audio archive dating back to 2012, and it's all ad-free. If you happen to use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube, you can follow and subscribe to Chilling Tales for Dark Nights there, where you'll get all of our latest updates and new releases and have the chance to interact with us each and every week. You can subscribe to me on YouTube as well at the Otis Jiry channel, where you'll find releases of my series, Horror Storytime, dating back to 2014. And you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram too. Just search for Otis Jiry. Until next week, stay spooky and get some sleep, if you can. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to Scary Stories Told in the Dark, a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com today to learn more about our network and our other amazing storytelling programs. Tonight's program was hosted, and its featured stories performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry. Selected stories have been adapted with the kind permission of their respective authors. Original music provided by Luke Hodgkinson and Jesse Cornett. Sound design and final mixing and mastering provided by executive producer and director Craig Groshek. Program's artwork and logo by David Romero. If you're looking for some fresh tales on a daily basis while waiting for the next podcast, check out my YouTube channel, the Otis Jiry channel, and my extensive collection of narrated tales there. Simply search on YouTube by my name, and you'll find me. And don't forget to subscribe and press the bell notification icon to get my latest releases. Got a scary tale of your own that you'd like performed? I take submissions. Email it to me today at otis@simplyscarypodcast.com to have your terrifying tome considered for production in a future episode of this show. That's OTIS@simplyscarypodcast.com. If you've enjoyed what you heard on tonight's program and are joining us on your favorite podcast app, subscribe to us to be sure you never miss an episode, and leave a 5-star review and a comment. Your feedback means a lot to me. You can also follow Chilling Tales for Dark Nights and yours truly on Facebook to connect anytime and get the latest updates on this and other programs and my channel. If you're listening on the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights YouTube channel, do us a favor and hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon for ctfdn as well to get more spooky tales from me and the crew and another episode of this program each and every Wednesday. And don't forget to hit that thumbs up button to tell us how we're doing and leave a kind word or a request. And don't forget to visit us at chillingtalesfordarknights.com and consider supporting the team by becoming a patron. In addition to helping us out, you'll get exclusive access to our audio archive and ad-free downloads of all your favorite stories, including those you've heard on this program. As for me, I'll be back next Wednesday with more terrifying tales to keep you up all night. But that's all right. Who needs sleep anyway?